Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Top Voice Tuesday. It is June 3rd, halfway through 2025, if you can believe it. We are barreling through the year, and I'm very excited to have with me Christopher Johnson, Top Voice. We're going to jump into this conversation about remaining calm and constant reinvention, and I'm just super excited about diving into that. Christopher, I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourself here in just a moment. Before I do, for those of you tuning in, please do let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat. We love to get locations and questions. We'll take a few of those. And if you're looking at other episodes or want to find back episodes of this show, it's on my YouTube channel, Michael J. Lopez 9. So please go subscribe to that. And we'll have all the links in here for getting connected with Christopher when we're done. So Christopher, you and I met a couple months ago, and in our Top Voice recognition. And so I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. And most importantly, tell us, how did you get to the top of the Top Voice mountain?
Well, funny story? Maybe. Okay. So I'm Christopher Johnson in metropolitan Detroit, and what I do is produce virtual events for nonprofits and member organizations, groups like Feeding America in California, WIC. I don't just manage the Zoom, I create an experience that reflects the mission of the organization and engages their audience. So my job is to make sure everything runs smoothly so the clients can focus on the impact. And how did I become a top voice? What was the pathway? All right. Someone else had to tell me, hey, I didn't know you were a top voice. And I am? Huh. So, yeah, someone else told me. And that was my acknowledgement. That was my, and they followed it up. You should have received an email. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
let me look through the thousands of emails I have from LinkedIn. Oh, that one. Okay.
So what's your and that's a familiar story. Most of us heard through an email and wanted to make sure that that was something legitimate. Tell us a little bit, Christopher, about your LinkedIn strategy. What's your approach? I mean, all of us have been recognized for the way we post, the way we create engagement, the kind of content we share. What's your philosophy around that, and how have you historically used the platform?
So my philosophy around it is sharing something that I think people should know, that moves me, that inspires me, that connects or resonates. So whether that is something, hey, here's this feature that I really think would make your virtual events just a little bit better. And that may be born out of a frustration. Have you ever been in a Zoom and you've seen something not go the way it could? You've seen something where it could have been substantially better. And you just, okay, all right, I have to write an article about this because, yeah, that didn't need to happen. Um, and sometimes it is a simple quote. You know, there's this, I've heard it described many different ways, like a yellow car theory. So yellow cars are on the road all the time. But until someone says, I want you to count the number of yellow cars. When you start paying attention to that, that's when you notice that amount. So one of the things I pay attention for, one of the things I look for only on days that I wake up is inspiration.
I love that. There's very much there's this quote that I use a lot. I think it's sort of attributed to Buddhist theory, but I don't know exactly where it came from, which is this idea that what we stare at gets bigger. And we can choose to look at the hard things. We can choose to look at the obstacles, the opportunities, or we can choose to look for inspiration, whatever that may be, which is a great segue into this conversation, because people may be wondering, and I'm going to maybe say the quiet part out loud. What is someone who does virtual events and designs these experiences have to talk about staying calm in the midst of reinvention? And I think you're the perfect one to talk to us about this. So you've been called the kind of calm voice behind the scenes. And for anyone listening, Christopher's voice is just made for these kinds of experiences. Why do you think that your presence and what you do has had such an impact? And how did you end up doing what you do? Let's talk about that.
All right, so I'll start with that. Um, pardon me. So my undergrad degree is actually broadcasting, and I worked in IT for decades. Okay, so IT, broadcasting. At the start of the pandemic, those two merged sort of with things like Zoom and other platforms. And I looked at it, wait a second, there are people who are uncomfortable with the technology and talking on camera. I can fix that. Um, so one of the things I did in the world of IT is help people understand how to use the software. So we just went through an upgrade. Okay, here's what you need to do, and give them as much as they want so they understand the process. And some people want to know why. Well, here's the why. Other people don't want to know the why. What do I press and when? Here's what you do. So being able to explain things like that to a variety of people at different levels of the organization was always something that was in my area, so to speak, in IT. And then in broadcasting, when the pandemic hit, and it's like, all right, I got laid off from my IT job.
Mhm.
Um, I saw this as an opportunity because some people are uncomfortable speaking on camera. People are still uncomfortable speaking on stage. That is always one of those, huh, uncomfortable. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
One of the things that's great, I just want to say this because I just before I forget the point. One of the things that's great about what you're describing is we had Wendy on and we talked about this idea of identifying your niche. And I think it's such a perfect characterization of this idea of taking your background, taking your expertise, finding an opportunity and filling the space with a very specific skill set that's made you incredibly successful, I would argue. Yeah.
thank you. Yeah. Because I'm not in helping my clients, I'm not the person that everyone shows up to see and hear. That's fine because I'm the person behind the stage, behind the curtain, in The Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Okay,
That's
yeah.
right.
But what happens when something goes awry? What happens when the speaker loses connectivity? We were chatting beforehand. Hey, are we really online? It's always good to know. So sometimes I've been in events where I've been running the event, and the speaker on stage has lost their internet connection. Okay, well, what are we going to do now? Not a problem. I can come on screen, step from behind the curtain. All right, it appears that Dr. So and so has just lost their internet connection. While they are valiantly trying to get reconnected, here's what we're going to do. Let's go through the chat and put in the question that you have thus far. I'll make sure these are organized so that when Dr. So and so returns, we'll be at a point where we can resume. Additionally, I have a copy of their presentation, so when they come back on, I'll have that up and they can just start right where they left off. And sure enough, this sort of thing usually takes less than 2 minutes, usually. And I'm texting in the background, making sure that they can get reconnected, checking to see what actually happened, helping somebody I always tell them, make sure you have your phone charged and you know how to use it as a Wi Fi hotspot just in case. And so while I'm doing all these things in the background, I'm facing the audience and keeping them calm and engaged. So when the speaker resumes, it's like, all right, you were on slide 37, and I have that up right now. So you don't have to worry about trying to find where you were and sharing the screen. We can continue. And we have these questions in the chat that you can address either right now or when we get to the Q&A portion. So I've done a few things there. I've kept the audience informed and engaged so they don't descend into chaos. It's like, oh, wait, somebody is in charge. The speaker, it's like, okay, it was just a minor hiccup. At the end, nobody remembers the minor hiccup. They remember, oh, wait, I think maybe, no, I got all my questions answered. It was a really great session. The hiccup is just that, is a moment that is not memorable. Now, when you focus the spotlight on the hiccup, looks like the speaker has just lost their connection. I don't know what
Let's
to
all,
do.
yeah, let's all sit here and stare at each other.
Yeah.
One of the things this reminds me, this is such a microcosm for life and for the things that we go through in many regards, right? I mean, I think it's, I think it was Eisenhower, right? So sort of planning is essential, plans are useless. What I hear you describing is this idea of how to be prepared for contingencies, how to be aware of what your options are, how to have support with someone like you or otherwise that might be able to jump in. But one of the things I'm really curious about is the emotional experience of for the individual who's experiencing the hiccup, right? We're all living through change, constant change, personally, professionally. What helps people stay grounded in those moments? Like, how do we take away a few tips that says, look, in the middle of the chaos, here's how I can remain present and grounded and ready for the next uncertain step?
Well, I'll start by saying proper planning beforehand. So, yeah, having the just in case and knowing what those steps are, that's one thing. Because when you have a checklist on what you can do, things that you can focus on, that helps just in case that event happens. That's why we all went through fire drills at school and work and all those different kinds. What do we do in an emergency? Well, it's that same principle when we're in virtual event spaces. What do we do when something goes off the rails? When that happens, our objective is to focus on the objective. What do we want the next outcome to be? Okay, so this option has just gone off the table. What's the objective of this event? What do I want the next outcome to be? Focus on that and move forward.
I have this one of the things that's a great example. One of the things I talk about in my book, everyone can see a picture behind me, or in my actual book behind me. I always keep it there. Is one of the unique sort of science phenomenon that we experience is how time lapses in moments of stress, right? And so, for example, a 30-second cold water immersion feels like a lifetime, right? Because you are finally slicing time in ways that every second of that experience, you are so intently tuned to the negative experience that you're having that it seems like it takes a lifetime. And of course, to somebody else, they're like, that was 30 seconds. That was nothing. One of the things I talk to people about is number one, acknowledge or recognize that your stressful experience feels a lot longer in duration than it actually is. It's one of the things I think in broadcasting, I had a coach one time talk to me about this is taking a pause is actually a really effective way of helping people concentrate and refocus. It feels like a long time for you, but for them, it's actually a helpful moment to just take a breath and reset. I'm curious about how you've helped people with those kinds of strategies in the moment as well.
Absolutely. Taking a pause is one of those key moments, is one of those key things. And it sounds natural. So, combining radio and virtual events. On the radio, silence for more than like a second and a half draws our attention. Wait, is there tech? Oh, no, there they are. All right. But it seems like it's like, wait a second, how much time do I have to get all this said? It's like, oh, 30 seconds. Huh. All right. 30 seconds can go really quickly. When in a virtual event, that same sort of pause, give the audience room to understand, ingest, absorb, think about what you just said, what is on the screen, what you want them to do. So, giving clear instructions to your audience, giving them a question, give them the space to ponder that question before moving on. So, it doesn't have to be an endless stream of not silence, space to think, time to absorb, time to reflect.
I remember years ago I was at it was an in-person event, and we had a speaker, it was sort of a motivational keynote type speech, and this individual was really good at pausing, and I remember that being the first moment thinking to myself, wow, that actually was a really effective strategy, and it didn't take that long. But when you're on the other end of that transaction, again, this idea that when we're stressed, we experience short duration events as if they last a lifetime. One way to control that, I'll maybe add to what you do. I'm not sure if this is something that you practice as well, but a deep breath, and actually what's called a dual deep breath, which is a double inhale, exhale, is actually a great way to regulate your central nervous system. You can lower, and I've seen this within 3 or 4 breaths, you can lower your heart rate by 30 or 40 beats. Sort of, bringing it down. Sorry, your blood pressure, you can bring that down. If you lowered your heart rate by 40 beats, that would probably be bad. There's ways to use these strategies. So I think it leads to the next question, and you've certainly learned this, but how do we teach staying composed in the moment? This idea of being calm amidst, sort of, amongst the storm. We're not firefighters. We're not police officers. We're not people who go into battle. We're people who show up to meetings and, go to work and do these things. And yet we manufacture these experiences and can kind of become dysregulated. So how do you help people learn these strategies as a skill?
By focusing on the outcome they can control and that they want to achieve. So oftentimes people get stuck on here's how this should go. And any deviation throws people into chaos. Um, Going back to what you were saying about the timing of things, have you ever practiced a speech because you're going to give a speech and you don't want to do it just, on a whim? So you practice it. When you practice that speech, and it's supposed to be, we'll say 20 minutes, the first time you practice it, wow, that was only 12 minutes. Okay. Part of that is nerves, part of that is, so understanding how you're pacing it, what you're doing in that moment, giving what you say the space. And when it becomes, when your first option is off the table, then just figuring out what is the overall objective and how can I get, what's the gap between where I am and that overall objective and working in that space. Um, you
So I
can't
think,
go, yeah.
yeah. Well, so I think, and there's a great comment in the chat about sort of, moving forward. This idea of focusing on what we can control. This idea of focusing. I always talk to my athletes that I coach about this: attitude and effort. Those are the two things we control in life. And I think what I hear you talking about is this idea of maybe letting go of how we think it should go and acknowledging how it is going and working within that structure. I do a lot of workshops in person. I've done many virtual as well. I'm not nearly as seasoned as you, but I always say to people, it's not a workshop unless I change something right in the middle of it, because we all have circumstances that show up. And I think this idea of being flexible, focusing on the outcome and not being so rigid about maybe the process. I have a workshop I'm doing in person on Friday morning. I have a design agenda. We've built it 5 or 6 times. We have different scenarios. We've got our slides. We've got our in-person things. I've practiced it maybe 5 or 6 times. I guarantee you something will change in the middle of that experience. And that's part of the skill. So talk to us about this idea of adjusting and being flexible. How do we stay grounded in that as we're moving? Because I've got to both facilitate but also redirect at the same time.
It is the skill of managing, understanding and managing time. So one of the things we always talk about, and you and I touched on it briefly, a run of show. What's going to happen when, and who's responsible for what happens? Okay, great. That's a starting point, much like your event on Friday. You have that laid out. But things do change. One of the things that triggers that change sometimes is active listening. Wow, that is a great point to dwell on. Let's, you know what, we're going to call an audible. We're going to skip the next segment. We're going to stay here a little bit longer And I know what adjustments we can make on the fly so that we still end on time. People never notice uh, the things that didn't happen. Here's what I mean by that. You have 30 slides. You know what? If you only go through 18 of them, but the audience is impacted and engaged, the 12 that you didn't show don't really matter in that arena.
That is something I talk to people about a lot, and I've had this experience myself learning to be a speaker. Is number one, you know more about what you're going to say than anyone else in the room. So if you skip something, to them it's just information that was never there. Um, I happen to be going through recording my audiobook right now. I hadn't done that before, and I'm kind of behind on it. And as I'm rereading my book, particularly out loud, I'm finding so many things like, oh, I could have done that differently. I could have said that better. I forgot this part. I meant to write this section and I didn't do it. And yet, that's information that we give ourselves back that ends up, I think, sometimes over informing us about our own experience versus the experience that someone else is having. Talk to us about this idea of, I think what you just said was have a plan, but the plan is really about creating an experience for someone else. That can show up in many different ways. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. The plan is the starting point. It is not uh, it's not written in concrete. Here's, you know, using a map analogy. So we use GPS all the time to go places. In the olden days, you might go to AAA and get a triptych, something on paper. It's like, all right, I'm going to go from here to there. But these days, when something happens, your GPS will tell you rerouting. Hey, there's traffic ahead that you didn't expect, rerouting. So you have a plan. It had a planned route. Something's come up, and now you have to make a deviation. Roll with it. It
That's
is
such a beautiful analogy, and we have just a few minutes left. I want to sort of level us back
okay.
up. We've talked about some good things in the tactics of designing and facilitating, but what does this tell us about how we show up as leaders, how we show up in teams, how we show up in our careers? What can we This is a microcosm of really a bigger conversation about staying flexible, moving in uncertain times. I would love to get your perspective on how we take away these lessons and apply them more broadly.
Well, for leaders, then the objective is to understand the people that you're leading and how they want to be seen, heard, and valued. So that doesn't look the same for every individual. Some people are introverts.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes is fine. Bringing me out on stage, well, all right. So sometimes I do speak on stage, and that's a whole different thing. When that is my purpose, speaking on stage, fine. If I don't have to be called out there, I'm fine in the background. So understand the people that you're leading and how they want to be seen, valued, and heard. Using that to design experiences that are meaningful to the audiences that you want to engage, meaningful to the people that you're leading. So making those adjustments and making those adjustments on the fly as needed.
And I think the thing I've heard you say a lot of here, which I think is really, really just beautiful in a lot of ways, is this idea of having a plan is important, but giving yourself the grace to move and adjust through this experience that we call life, right? And I said this to someone yesterday. Life is the thing that happens to us when we're planning for something else. Stuff happens and it happens from every angle. And I think there's some real wisdom in learning how to build this skill of remaining flexible and adjusting. I mean, it literally is the purpose of the book that I've written. Change is what happens to us all the time, and reinvention should be something that we're all aspiring to. So Christopher, before we get to your bonus question, give us what are the three things you want people to really take away from this idea of remaining calm and this idea of reinvention, and how do we move through this experience of adjusting?
All right. So remaining calm, focusing on the moment, not the past. Um, Live at the edge of your comfort zone because that's where the stories are. If you're always comfortable, then you're not doing anything new or different. And share, invite other people along the journey, see who you can help, and don't be closed off to help. Open yourself up to being helped.
I love that. I think it's this idea of support is something that I talk about in my book a lot. It's something that certainly we do in our own professional lives is the more you can go through an experience not alone, the more you feel like you've got someone to lean on, someone to support, someone to help. And that's just a really, really important message for everybody. I want to give time to get to your bonus question, which is really actually quite, there's always this really interesting alignment when people leave questions for the next guest. So, in moments of deep stress like this, when we're in the midst of the storm, how do we know that we're making the right decision? How does Christopher, when he's in the middle of a big moment, it's stressful, things aren't going right, how do you know you've made the right decision? What's your process around that?
This my answer may be a little bit different. I think about it in terms of other people. How would I explain what I did to my wife, my kids, my parents? So that sort of helps me refocus and think, all right, so what do I want? How do I want the story I'm going to tell them to be shaped by this moment?
Interesting. So that means you're leaning on your values as a person to say, if someone had to tell this story, would they tell it in a way that I was proud of?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. I do a lot of work with companies, of course, and we talk about values and we talk about corporate values. And one of the things I say to them all the time is that corporate values are designed to help you make decisions in times of uncertainty. That is their purpose. If we know the answer, I don't need values because I know that it's about when I don't know what to do next. How do I lean on my values to make a choice that's in keeping with who we are as an organization and who I am as an individual? And I love that, Christopher, because I think it really just reminds us that, there's probably 4 to 5 things in everybody's bucket that says, I'd be proud of this, maybe not so much of that. So, how do I make decisions in keeping with those values? Really, really great message. Christopher, I want to give you the last few minutes here. How can we follow you beyond LinkedIn and anything you'd like to offer up to folks watching this in real time or watching it back that they may be able to reach out to you for?
Sure. Thank you very much. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. Look for Christopher G. Johnson. My company is Calm Clear Media. Look for that as well. Follow me there. And my offer, I've been working on a virtual event etiquette checklist because, well, hey, we've all seen people get things a little bit wrong. So if we have an etiquette checklist, we can have better experiences online. And send me a note, and I'll be happy to send that your way.
I love that. Thank you, Christopher. And thank you again for being part of the Top Voice community. I just think that your skill set, what you do, this behind the scenes coaching, guidance, and support, it's one of those things where there truly is a niche for everybody. And I love the connective tissue between last week's conversation and this one and the detail about how we stay grounded in these moments because everything's going to change. That's just how things go. And so having a plan for that is really, really essential. Thank you to the community for dialing in. Another great episode of Top Voice Tuesday. Please go to Michael J. Lopez and subscribe, and we'll put all these episodes up there. And look forward to seeing you next week.